Over the weekend, I came across a really interesting article online that follows sort of the lineage and the evolution of the Atari brand and the word mark and the logo and the fonting and everything about that, the way that Atari as an entity presents itself commercially, as to the public. And while I found it really interesting from a graphic design standpoint, because I find that stuff really fascinating, but even more so, I found it fairly illuminating looking at what changed when and what hasn't changed when, that shines some interesting light on what was going on in the early 2000s with Atari, which we all know was a pretty dark time to be an Atari fan. It was pretty much just a shell of itself. It was just a name and an emblem. Up until the current day, under the new administration, that appears to be kind of turning Atari around and bringing it back into prominence. The things I saw in this article and the evolution it showed shed some light on all of that, and I'll show you what I mean right after this.
This video brought to you in part by Tommy and the Order of Cosmic Champions. This exciting and heartwarming coming-of-age Gen X novel is available now. Check the link for more info.
Hey there, welcome back to Gen X Grown Up. I'm John, and I am a Gen X Grown Up. Thank you so much for taking the time to click on this video. The article in question is from a company called Fabrik. Now, they're like a marketing and branding and logo work consultancy firm. But in addition to the work that they do, they're very heavily into looking at other corporate brand marks that exist and looking at their history. And they'll periodically do articles tracing the history of these logos and brands. They recently did a PlayStation and a Sega and Nintendo, but I saw over the weekend they posted this article about Atari, tracing its lineage and its logo and how it's evolved over now 50 plus years. So let's jump right in and show you what I mean when I say 50 plus years. It starts by looking at the Syzygy logo. Now, this was Nolan Bushnell's company that predates Atari, and it outlines, look, here's the big swooping S in the Syzygy, and it's got the dots over there. Now, I start here with Syzygy, even though it's not yet Atari, because it has a little bit of an impact and influence on some later logos as they were experimenting once Atari was formed. So let's jump ahead to 1972, which was the incorporation of Atari. And even at this early date, this logo, even though it's like an Art Deco font, notice how the two A's kind of lean in and the T has that kind of rounded top. Already, even at this point, at the very inception of the company, there was a vision that there was going to be, you can almost see that Fuji logo coming into play with the two A's leaning in toward the T. It's not too big of a stretch to look back and see that that was probably an early inspiration for what became the Fuji logo in the Atari that we know so well today. Now, the second year of Atari's existence in 1973 was by far the most chaotic in terms of the changes to their logo. And it, predates when most of us were paying attention to it. Atari was out there, but it was doing mostly just coin-op games that were going in bars and restaurants and that sort of thing. It wasn't yet a household name that we all knew. In June of 1973, they introduced this logo, this SA. It's kind of, there's like an A and an S. And I almost think that the S in there might be a hint back to the Syzygy logo. Now, it doesn't look like the font of the Syzygy logo, but certainly the S harkens back to that, and there's no other reason for an S to be there. So it's pretty obviously Nolan Bushnell kind of saying, what about my Syzygy? Let's get that in there a little bit. And the whole logo is kind of in this, crosshairs, a line across it, and it's in an oval, almost looks like it's a targeting reticle, like you're going to shoot something. And that didn't last very long. Pretty soon they said, hey, that's fine, but it doesn't say Atari anywhere. So they added this kind of futuristic word mark that says Atari on the side. And it's the A's and the R's are really kind of stretched and deformed a little bit. I think it looks pretty cool, and it looks like the 70s. It looks like a 70s sci-fi movie. But even that didn't last very long. Then they bailed on that SA logo and ditched that. They got rid of the target entirely, all that thing. They dropped the incorporated and just went with this stylized kind of sci-fi font thing. Then later in 73, the word mark got even more tweaking, and that Fuji logo, the one that we know so well, the two sloping sides with a central post, was introduced, and some of that sci-fi quality of the font was backed off a little bit. They got rid of some of the serifing. It's not quite as thick and bold and a little more legible. And this I just think is really fascinating. Look at this, by the end of 1973, look at what has happened to the logo. The Fuji's in place that we know, plus that sci-fi font was replaced with this very smooth and vertical font that we know today to be the Atari font, what we associate with Atari. It was on the cover of every 2600 box and every 7800 box, and on the end of our cartridges. Look, it's that font that we know. And incidentally, in the article that inspired this video over at Fabrik, that I'll link to in the description here, they give links to, like all the colors used, and you can go get that font if you want. It's SF Atarian symbol or something, I think it's called. But it's the one that we continue to know and use today, and that was in place by the end of 1973 after only about 2 years in existence. And that's what they used for a good long time, all the way through the 70s and the 80s, and then they started to decline, and we all know what happened in the mid-80s. And then it wasn't until somebody snapped up the name and started using it. Look, in the roller coaster tycoon era, we'll remember Atari was still around, but it wasn't really. It was just kind of a shell of itself. And that's when in 2002 they switched to this. I never liked this style, and I never knew why, because I wasn't paying attention to the marketing and stuff going on back then and what was happening in the company. But they moved the Fuji to the center, replaced the second A in Atari with that Fuji, went from black and white to now red and white. And so now you have to see the Fuji as an A in the center of the logo. And it's fine, but something about it always just kind of struck me as weird. But not as weird as what happened in 2003, when they brightened the red and did this weird thing to the Fuji logo. Like they flared out the bottoms of the logo. Like the middle one kind of looks like a trumpet sitting on its end, and the bottoms are kind of fat. And is it supposed to look more like a rocket, or is it make it more vertical, or what? I never cared for this version of the logo. Whenever I see an Atari logo with the fat bottom on the A, it just looks wrong to me. And I figured that was it. I mean, that was the logo we had throughout the better part of the early 2000s, and I figured Atari was done, and this is how it was going to end, with this weird fluted Fuji logo. But then, in late 2009, I think, was when they then introduced this square logo. They got rid of the horizontal, and now we moved to this square Atari. Now, several things changed. Finally, we got the Fuji. We fixed the Fuji. We got rid of that flared bottom. We got it out of the Atari word and put all the letters back. The Atari word mark is below the Fuji now, somewhat squished. It's vertically condensed, so it's not as tall and proud and prominent as the font initially was. But they also added below it the website URL, which is very, very informative of the time, which is, look, let's put the website. How are we going to put it? www. Look, you don't have to do that anymore. And in fact, by 2012, they evolved it further. And of course, now we're well into the internet era. There's no need to even tell anybody you have a website, let alone tell them the www part. They fixed just about everything about the logo. They returned the font to its full height, so it's nice and tall and proud. They got rid of the URL at the bottom, as I said. The Fuji's on top, and we have this nice square Atari logo. And this, in fact, is the same logo we continue to use today. And what I found fascinating was, look how they mangled the logo. When I say they, I don't mean, look, Atari has changed hands so many times. I'm not talking and pointing at any particular person, but the owners of Atari at the time who had the brand, I think it was Infogrames or somebody had it, they just wanted to put their own mark on it. And that's what they modified the Fuji, and they did some weird stuff in that era that I didn't care for. And that's the sign of a company that is trying to put their mark on something and make it their own. What I find really interesting and heartening is that in this modern era, in the Wade Rosen era of Atari, where we're seeing acquisitions and we're seeing new things happening and new developments and recharge titles and things like that, is that this current guard, they are not trying to put their mark on Atari. Back in 2012, when we got the now square logo that we still know today, it would be very easy for a new guard to come in and go, let's put our stink on it. Let's modify it, turn it upside down, and change the font and all that. But they're not, because the feeling I'm getting, and what seems to be more and more evident, is the folks running Atari now are more about the legacy of Atari than they are leveraging Atari to make money. Now, there's nothing wrong with making money, but when you're just, you're feeding off the carcass of something to make money versus you're using the history of something, I really find that what they're doing now, despite little weird questionable things that we've talked about, the NFTs and the crypto and the things that maybe I'm just too old to understand, but the game side, the stuff that Atari is doing now, tells us that, look, that logo likely is not going to change anymore. I mean, something could change tomorrow and this could age like milk, but at the moment they've been running Atari for several years, and what they've done is double down on the history of Atari, not try to reinvent it and make it their own. And I found that look at the history of graphics not only interesting, but informative, and shines some light in the corners and maybe helps to illuminate what Atari Corporate is thinking today. And I think it's why I feel pretty optimistic about the near future for Atari and the approach that they're taking to the brand. Hey, I'll throw some links over my shoulders here and here to some other Atari coverage I've done recently. I certainly hope you found something to enjoy in this quick video, and I can't wait to talk to you again next time. Bye-bye.